Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to round four coverage from my games from the Larry Evans Memorial Chess Tournament, the 2018 edition. My round four game was played at 7 in the evening. The round three was played at 10 in the morning. This was on Saturday, the second day of the tournament. There's a larger split than usual between the two rounds because what they do is they have a 2 day session as well as a 3 day session for playing, and then the round four is when both those groups come together. So my opponent was actually someone who had played in the 2 day, which meant that he had 3 games already that day, and this was his fourth game. And he was a youngster. He was one of the kids at the tournament with a rating of 1868, while my rating was 1803. Someone commented that I always mention when I'm playing youngsters. I do that because the ratings may be they are actually less stable for young people than they are for adults. By the time you're an adult, your rating is usually pretty stable. You don't see so much change, whereas kids can be rapidly improving, and when that happens, their rating lags behind. So usually a kid with a rating of 1868 is somewhat stronger than the rating would indicate. So that's why I give that information. But in this case, he was looking really tired. I think those 3 games had worn him out. And obviously, he hadn't had a great tournament so far because he's at the same position that I am, which is at 1 point out of 3. Anyway, he had the white pieces, and he started off with e4. I went e5. He went knight f3. I went knight c6. He went bishop c4, the Italian game. And I went bishop c5, my usual response. You can, of course, play the two knights defense. That's another very popular line here, but I've never played that as black. In fact, I always liked playing against it as white, so probably to take it up as black would be an effort. Now my opponent was moving very quickly here, and of course these are pretty standard moves, but I was pausing to think because well, here he castled, and that's actually not the main move. The main move here is c3, trying to build up a big center. There's also just d3 if you want to build up a small center immediately, or b4, the Evans Gambit. Those are like the top 3 choices. He castled, which is the 4th choice. So it's not so popular in the database, but I've seen it a lot in practice. It leaves this pawn undefended for another moment, and sometimes, black plays knight f6 here, kind of the natural move. Sometimes white will even leave that pawn undefended and play some kind of gambit like d4 here, but he just simply defended it with d3. So we got to this position pretty quickly. My moves were all standard, but at this point I have to think. Now the main move is really d6, and then white usually goes c3. That's the way that it's played in the opening book, and this is fine for both sides. But after d6, white can also play bishop to g5, which I find to be somewhat of an annoying pin. The thing is, with these pawns here, this bishop is outside the pawn chain, so there's no simple retreat of the bishop to bring the to break the pin. I mean, if you could get the knight to this square, then you could kick the bishop this way, and that would also break the pin. But that takes some doing. If the knight goes to this square, then the bishop can take the knight already and mess up the pawns over here. So the simple knight to e7 to g3 there, g6 rather, is not going to be playable, or it's not going to be particularly good, I guess. So I just don't like this. And in fact, this is not a particularly common position because bishop g5 is not really the main move there. Like I said, the main move is still to build up in the center. But the way it's usually played is with h6 and g5. And this is one of those positions black hasn't castled yet, so there's no point in sacrificing on g4. That's just a bad sacrifice. And so the bishop goes back to g3. And I guess the point is, and the reason it's not played so much, is that this bishop is not hitting on any pleasant target here. It's a pretty solid rock that it's finding itself facing, and this knight can come here and harass the bishop or trade it off, or maybe come to the f4 square. So black should be okay here, and that's why white doesn't play this way. But on the other hand, I don't especially like this position for black because the kingside is weakened, and the white has ideas of playing h4 later to undermine it. It could be annoying. So anyway, in this position, I decided to play h6. And I also said, well, I should look up this position afterwards and see if this is a playable move. So it seems to be playable here. It is a bit of a time waster, and white could probably get an advantage with just pushing c3 and just trying to build up a big center and not bothering to play any slow moves, but just going directly for building up in the center. Let's see, I guess play could continue like this: c3, d6, b4, kicking my bishop, a4, threatening to trap it, and then a6. That's one way to continue. White's built up quite a lot of space here, and has a number of ways to continue, including the interesting knight a3 move. So there's probably an advantage to white in this position, and so that's why this h6 move is a bit slow. But my opponent did not try to take advantage of that at all. In fact, after I played h6, he just played h3. So not trying to get anything out of the opening, but just trying to avoid me coming back with a pin at some point. So now I go with d6, and we get a pretty standard position with these two moves thrown in, the h3 and the h6. Let's see, I castled, play a4 here. This is a kind of a neat little trick. If your opponent is a little bit unwary, this actually threatens to trap the bishop. If you just develop this piece, say, then this move comes with tempo, and if the bishop comes back, then it's trapped. Actually, in this case, does it have a square? No, it really doesn't have a square to go to. So some unwary players can fall for that, although that's mostly a blitz trick, I guess, to throw the a-pawn forward. Anyway, you need to make room for the bishop right away, so you play a6, and he played b4 and dropped the bishop back to a7, so that's how the game went. And now he went bishop to e3, and he was continuing to play these moves very fast, whereas I was trying my best to take my time and think about each move. I don't really want to take. I mean, taking is certainly playable. It doubles this pawn, but it gives him an extra pawn in the center, and it opens up the f-file for an attack on my kingside here. So, I mean, overall, it's probably okay, but it's just not the kind of position I enjoy playing, so I'm avoiding taking that bishop. And I play the move queen e7. As an alternative to queen e7, the chess engine is saying that d5 could be played here. And, well, one of the rules of playing these e4 openings, the Italian game and such, is that if you can play the move d5 with black and get away with it, you probably should. It seems like it's, it tends to equalize. That's why that rule stands. So it sort of forces the exchange. I'm hitting his bishop. If he drops it back, I can actually take here and maybe even win a pawn on win a pawn on e4. So he takes. He wants to take with a pawn rather than the bishop. Take with a knight. And then, well, he could play queen to b3 or queen to e2. And let's see, I could play rook to e8. The queen is defending my knight, and it just seems like this is a fine position for both sides, but it seems like I've kind of opened things up a little bit, and I should be okay here. So that's probably best play. But queen e7 is an okay move as well, and my idea here is to support this bishop coming out to e6. So white immediately took my bishop off and played knight b to d2. And yeah, this is another point where the chess engine actually prefers the knight coming out to a3. Kind of an interesting idea. But I guess the knight may be putting pressure on this b5 square. Maybe you can push the b pawn forward and create some damage over here on the queen side. Anyway, it's a different and slightly offbeat way of playing the position. I think knight b d2 is a pretty standard way of playing. So, and there's certainly nothing wrong with it. And then at this point, I get my bishop to e6 move in. So I'm feeling pretty good about this position. I have, I guess, a slightly awkward rook here, but I've got my pieces off the back rank, and yeah, it looks like nothing has gone wrong in the opening. He goes queen to e2 here, and I drop my rook back. Let's see, instead of queen e2, he could have played queen b3. Is another place where playing that might be good. It kind of provokes this trade. I don't really want to let him take a pawn here. Yeah, I guess he would actually win the pawn. So I would probably take, and he could take with the knight. And this seems like a good square for the knight. And I can't... Can I get away with b5? I mean, my knight is defending the rook. Not clear to me if I can get away with b5 chasing the knight away. But anyway, this seems to be a good position for white. But he went with queen e2, which should also be okay, maybe not the strongest. And, you know, I thought he was looking at the queen e3 with the tempo on my rook. There's no real harm in that because it's not yet a double attack, although maybe he could try and set something up tactically with knight coming to h4 perhaps. And maybe there's nothing there. But anyway, I thought it would be simplest just to drop my rook back, get it away from those kind of discovered attacks. And, well, actually at the moment it's defended by the knight as well, but he may be chasing that knight away at some point. But anyway, I just thought it was simplest just to get the rook back to the back rank, so my rooks are connected and defending each other, and I don't have to worry about discoveries on the A file. So he did bring his queen forward to e3. Maybe he liked that square anyway, even without the tempo on the rook. And here I played knight h5. Once the queen is off this diagonal, if we back up, when the queen is on this diagonal, and I play a move like knight h5, then I always have to worry about discoveries. You know, the knight could grab a pawn, and when I take the knight back, this knight is hanging over here on h5. But when he moves his queen up to e3, then I can get knight to h5 in. But now we see why he played queen e3. He pushes the d-pawn forward. And I have to do something pretty quickly here. He's threatening to fork these two pieces, possibly threatening to win a pawn there. But I can solve all of that by trading off this bishop. And then I went ahead and took the pawn here on d4. And he took back with the knight, and I kept taking. So all of this is okay up to this point. The chess engine doesn't think white had any big edge out of this, but it should be equal. But his next move is a slight mistake. So if you want to think about it, how would you take back? Okay, you can pause the video if you want some time to think about the move here. What he played was queen to d4. And what the chess engine is recommending in this position is pawn takes d4. So probably he was a little concerned about these pawns that are sitting up here without a lot of support, maybe becoming weak at some point, but they can always come forward and trade themselves off, so they're not in much trouble. And they control a lot of squares here, so that is 2 points in their favor. And then there's another issue with the queen takes d4, which is maybe the most relevant point, is that it gives up control of the f4 square, and I can just pop a knight into f4, which I'd been thinking about doing anyway. I mean, that was the whole point of playing knight to h5, was to bring the knight to the f4 square. So, and I don't even need a pawn here on e5 defending the knight, because that square is just not under under white's control, so I can just plop it there. And the knight over here on f4 is always something that white needs to be concerned about. There's maybe sacrificial ideas on these squares, and in this case there's the immediate knight to e2 forking the king and queen. So this is a little wake-up call. See if your opponent is awake, see if he's going to notice the fork there. And he was certainly alert enough to play king to h2 here and get out of the fork. So even though he was kind of sleepy and moving quickly, seemed to be at least alert to what was going on the board. And then let's see, I played rook f to e8, so piling up on the e-pawn here. He defended with f3. And then I played queen g5. So very quickly this game kind of turned around to where I suddenly have the initiative. And if we go back, I just want to reinforce the idea again. It really traces itself to this move, queen takes d4. And it's not that I'm winning after this. It's just that I have this initiative and maybe a slight edge objectively. So knight f4, king h2, rook f8, f3, and then I went queen g5. So the chess engine says it's a little more accurate to play d5 first and then queen g5. I actually did it in the opposite order. But if I play d5 here, he should probably take, and he has to take with the pawn. If he lets me take, he'll be left with some kind of weakness there. And then queen g5. This is the line given by the chess engine. I played queen g5 first. I mean, it's a very forcing move and kind of hard to resist. I've gone from threatening king and queen fork to threatening mate, and he needs to find a way to defend. He came up with rook a2, which is one of the good defenses, and now I played d5. And the idea here is I really just want to open up lines, and I don't mind actually sacrificing that pawn to get the e-file open. That's going to be a real key to winning this game. So here, he should not allow that file to be opened. He should play something like knight to a5. That was the chess engine suggestion. Hitting my b pawn over here, say I defend it with rook to b8, and then just kind of sitting on the position. Rook b2 is given. Now this does allow me to give him this weak pawn here on e4, but it seems there's not any immediate mate or a breakthrough attack, so I just have some kind of edge. Maybe I can threaten something on g3 here. So that is the chess engine's suggestion for best play for both sides. Here, let's go back to the game. So what he did was worse, and actually I'm winning after this. He takes d5, and I have a winning edge here. And it starts with this move, knight to e2, hitting his queen, and he dropped his queen back to d2, offering the trade. So here is one of the key moments in the game, and there's two different ways that black could proceed. Black could trade queens and go for the endgame, and notice that I'm the pawn down at the moment, but this pawn is hanging, so I'll get this pawn back. So I can go into an endgame, or I can keep the queens on and keep attacking. And so this would be a good moment for you to exercise your chess your chess ability here on both sides. So try and figure out, if you go for the queen trade and go for that endgame, what kind of endgame is it? Is that an endgame that favors white? Is it an endgame that favors black? Or is it an even endgame? And then on the other hand, if you decide to keep the queens on and continue attacking, what is the best way to continue the attack? And is that attack something that is winning for black, or is it something that is that white can defend and chase back? And of course, if white successfully defends against the attack, then white ends up a pawn up here and may even go on to win the endgame. So that's the question for you. And why don't you pause the video here and think about it? Think about both sides of that question, and then decide for yourself how you would play. Okay, yeah, that was a little pause to give you time to stop the video. I'm going to give away the answer now. I'm going to start with the move I played in the game, which is I went for the endgame. And what I was thinking was that after queen takes, he has to take back with either the rook or the knight. He chose taking with the rook, which is probably best. And then I grabbed this pawn. And this is what I was thinking. This knight here, well, first of all, I calculated very carefully to make sure that knight could not get trapped. And it always has some way out. Part of the idea is that it's hitting this pawn, which is loose, and when that moves forward, the knight can come here. And so I saw that I could play this, and I would definitely be able to save the knight. It wouldn't get trapped. So I get my pawn back, and I was looking at this pawn structure that was left, and you know, he's got this isolated d pawn. So my conclusion when I went and chose this path was that this was an endgame that was better for black. Actually, that turns out not to be the case, so we'll get to that. But that was part A of the question. Was I thought that was going to be better for black, and it turns out to be even. And we'll finish the game with that. But let's go back and look at the path I didn't take. What I was thinking when I evaluated this situation was I was thinking I would continue with queen g3 check. The king only has one move, so this is forcing and easy to calculate. King goes to h1. And then I thought I would play knight to f4 here with a couple of ideas. First of all, I'm keeping a mate threat on g2, so he has to be tied up defending that. And secondly, I have this idea of sacrificing the knight over here. And then with the check, notice that his rook is loose. So if I can sacrifice over here, take back and check with the queen, he brings his queen over to block. My queen can take his loose rook there, and that's a way to get a winning edge. So I was pretty excited about this until I saw that he could play knight e3, a very annoying defensive move. And it kind of takes the steam out of my attack. And so the knight does a number of things. It defends over here, but also it defends the rook. So there's no more idea of sacrificing over here. The other thing I was threatening in this position was simply rook to e2, kicking this queen back and mating on g2. So there were all these threats that I saw at first, and that was what I was kind of steering for. And then I saw that he had this move, knight to e3, and that just seems to meet all of the threats. Now, that is true, what I said so far. So this is not a winning edge for black, but there is some pressure for black still, and I can continue with the move like rook up here, and maybe bring this over and just continue to pile up pressure, maybe bring another rook in. So this would have been a way for me to keep an advantage. But the other thing is there's, let's back up, there was an even better move here. So if you found this continuation, I have to give you full credit. And the best continuation here is queen g3 check, king back, just like before. And then instead of bringing the knight to f4, play queen to h4. And this is just winning. This is a really neat trick. The queen is hitting this loose knight over here, and the knight is threatening to come into g3 with a fork, and it's just really difficult for white to meet all of these threats, and yeah, it's just a winning game at this point. Let's see, did I continue any suggested moves from the chess engine here? No. Even queen e1 trying to trade queens will run into this check, and yeah, it's just not, it is not going to work out. So that is the answer in this position. After he played queen to d2, I should have just gone with queen g3 check followed by queen to h4. A nice little two-move sequence, which is just really hard to meet. Actually, I was missing something there, wasn't I? Queen here. Hang on a second. Oh. So queen to g3, king to h1, queen to h4. If he goes there, yeah, that's what I was forgetting. When I deliver this check, maybe you notice that the rook is hitting the queen. Just to point that out. So anyway, there's no good defense after queen h4. White is losing some material one way or another. Anyway, back to the game. Queen d2, and it's my turn, and I chose, as I said, the endgame. And I'll just show you what I missed, because actually he offered a draw right here, and I said no. I was still playing for a win, so I declined the draw. He took. I took here. And then he played a5, and I played knight b5. And he just very simply played rook f to d1. And this is when I realized that, in fact, I'm not any better, because there's no way I can stop him from playing d6, just pushing this pawn forward and dissolving the weakness. So I thought I was going for an endgame where I was slightly better and I could play for a win, but in fact this endgame is totally even. We played on a few more moves. I played rook a d1, he went d6, I took, he took, I took back and offered the draw, and he accepted, so we agreed to a draw at this point. So it was a good game, I thought. I missed my chance. He continued to play fast all the way through, and I was taking my time, but still, it was the second game, and probably at that key moment, I was a little low on energy. When your opponent is moving quickly, it gives you less time to think in a way because you do get to think on your opponent's time. So if he's moving quickly, I have to do all the thinking on my own time, and I was falling behind in terms of the time because he was moving so quickly, which always makes you a little bit nervous, even if you have what seems like a decent amount of time left. To be so far behind your opponent in the amount of time you have is unnerving at times. But yeah, basically, I just did not spend enough time calculating that key position and enough time discovering the resources on the attacking side and also discovering his resources on the other side, on the endgame side. But, well, it makes for good exercises for you guys anyway. And, well, a decent result overall for my second day. So the first day, I was 0 for 2. The second day, I was 1.5 for 2. So I'm headed back towards 50%, which would be a decent result if I'm at the bottom of Class A and I can hit 50%. In this tournament, that would be an okay result for me. So anyway, that's it for this game. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and stay tuned for round 5 coverage.